It's hard to believe, but it's that time again to talk about hurricane season. Joining us today is Dr. Phil Klotzbach, as well as our own hurricane hunter, Josh Morgerman. So let's get right to this, Phil. Let's get your forecast. What are you expecting to happen with our friends from Colorado State University, and how are things going to go this year?
Yes, we are forecasting an above normal Atlantic hurricane season in 2025. We're calling for a total of 17 named storms. Of those 17, we're forecasting 9 to become hurricanes. And of those 9, we're forecasting 4 to become major hurricanes. So it is above normal. An average season has about 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, but not as busy as what we saw last year, where we had 18 storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. So just threw a whole bunch of numbers at you right off the bat.
Josh, let's bring you in as well, because you are kind of a walking encyclopedia when it comes to tropical weather for us here at WeatherNation. So I'm sure you have some questions for Phil as well.
Something big picture I'm noticing is, when you look at the sort of 170 years of data that we have, we have like sort of slow periods in the Atlantic and busy periods. It just feels like season after season is a busy season for us. What's going on there? And does that sort of like those decadal cycles factor into your forecast?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, since 2015 was the last year we actually had a below normal hurricane season. But when it comes to what's going on in the Atlantic, the last, say, since about the mid 1990s, has just been much warmer than it was in the 70s and 80s. And at the same time, we've been generally trending more towards La Nina. So in general, when you have La Nina or more La Nina-like conditions, it tends to lower this year, and that combined with the extremely warm Atlantic has basically helped to kind of fuel, in general, busy hurricane seasons, especially over the last decade.
Hey, Phil, let's get a little more perspective on the historical areas of what we're talking about with the hurricane season. A lot of people understand El Nino. A lot of people understand a little bit more about La Nina. What really does that mean to a common person as far as looking at this current forecast coming ahead?
For this coming year, fortunately, conditions do not look as conducive as last year, but still more conducive than normal. So the Atlantic is not as warm as it was last year at this time. There's actually a little bit of cool water now off the west coast of Africa. The latest forecasts from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, gives a 13% chance of El Nino for August through October, which is still pretty low, but obviously a 1 in 7, 1 in 8 chance is still certainly not zero. So there's more uncertainty, I would say, with the April forecast this year than with a typical April forecast.
Yeah, and I have like the big question that's very hard to answer, but that everyone is always most interested in. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have any broad indicators about what parts of the United States coast might be more likely to be impacted?
Yeah, so at this point, we can't really say like where or when, any particular storm would strike. One thing that we do forecast, and we started doing this a couple of years ago, is effectively wind energy in the western half of the Atlantic basin. And why we focus on the western half is because that's where people live. 2025, getting to your question, we do anticipate likely either neutral or La Nina. So the odds of activity in the western half of the basin are a little bit higher, I would say, than in an average year. Our group at CSU, we also put out 2-week forecasts starting in early August, where we go into more detail. Instead of saying, okay, it looks like a busy season, we'll go in and say, okay, maybe the next 2 weeks look busy, and activity looks to either be more stuff that recurves off of Africa, or potentially there's going to be a lot of storm activity in the western half of the basin, maybe something, say, formed in the Caribbean, maybe going north into the Gulf, stuff like that.
Phil, is there anything unusual that we're seeing with water temperatures in the Atlantic, or maybe even in the Pacific, that might be leading you or directing you in this forecast for the year?
Yeah, so in 2025, so unlike last year at this time, the waters are not as warm in the Atlantic. We've actually had fairly strong, what we call the trade winds, which typically blow from east to west across the Atlantic. Those have been fairly strong the last couple of months. Now, those winds over the next few weeks do look to start to weaken. So, unfortunately, we probably will start to see those water temperature anomalies or differences from average, which are now maybe just a little above normal, to start tick back upwards over the next few weeks. Over the next couple months, we look pretty likely to be transitioning over to neutral conditions, but I think as long as those winds in the central tropical Pacific remain fairly strong, we probably won't see a transition over to El Nino this summer and fall. But this is April. Unfortunately, we have this phenomenon known as the El Nino or El Nino springtime predictability barrier. Basically, small changes in the winds can cause big changes in how the ocean responds this time of year, which is one of the reasons why we issue updated forecasts.
So, Phil, I have another question, which is kind of a crowd favorite, one I'm always really into. What are our analog years for this season? And for folks who don't know, analog years means seasons that this one might be like.
Yeah, so when we come up with analogs, what we're looking for are years in the past that had conditions similar to what we currently see, end of March, early April, and what we expect to see for the peak of the hurricane season, August through October. So the years that we came up with were 1996, 1999, 2006, 2008, 2011, and 2017. And so if you're a hurricane buff, you might think, well, there's a very big spread in what actually occurred those years. One of the things that highlights is just there is a lot of uncertainty. The second year after an El Nino in 2004 actually was a weak El Nino. 2006, we actually had El Nino again. Those are years that broadly had similar sets of oceanic and what we anticipate atmospheric conditions. We're not saying that the storm tracks are going to be like those years.
Phil, we have time for one more question, and I need to slide this question in as we do every year. How should people use this forecast that you're giving at this point?
It's an informational tool. It's not a preparedness tool. We always stress with all of our seasonal forecasts, one, these forecasts aren't perfect. But two, even if the forecast is exactly verifies and we get 9 hurricanes, we can't tell you where exactly those storms are going to go. From a preparedness perspective, we just want to, now's the time to, have a plan in place, kind of check your hurricane preparedness kit, know what you're going to do if storms do threaten. And if a storm does threaten, to follow the advice of your local emergency managers, because they can tell you the best whether you should, be evacuating, sheltering in place.
Phil and Josh, this has been a great discussion. I appreciate both of you taking the time today. Again, it's hard to believe, but it's that time to start thinking about hurricane season again. So I'm sure we'll talk to you again very soon.